Captain Francis J. Dougherty. Well, actually, we had just gotten started, so there were no UHF communications between airplanes at the time, because we had just gotten started up. A lot of the airplanes hadn't even gotten started when this happened, and they were just involved in the sympathetic detonations after this one bomb went off. As soon as the first bomb went off, everybody said, you know, this is it, we're out of here. And of course, there was over the 1MC, the main communication systems, you can hear all over the flight deck and also internally to the ship. You know, they were talking about the explosions so everybody would know, and then they send to general quarters and so forth, so guys would go to the battle stations and what have you. But there were no radio communications taking place, just internally. My skipper and I, he was the pilot, I was the XCer, flight officer, radar intercept officer, and we were just going through our startup checks, turn on. I had a lot of equipment that I had to turn on and check out and so forth. And of course, he was up front doing the, you know, all the engine checks and control checks and so forth. And that's when I noticed that there was this little fire in this airplane next to us. We weren't sure what it was going to turn into at first. We thought maybe it was just a small fuel dump fire or whatever. And then, of course, it got bigger, and I said, we better get out of here. I said, they don't have this thing under control yet. And then about a couple of nanoseconds after that, the bomb went off, the first one. And then that started the sympathetic detonation of all the ordnance and all the other airplanes. And as you can imagine, all the airplanes were fully loaded with fuel and so forth. So the explosions would then cause huge fires and so forth, which you'll see in this picture. The launch of this, the inadvertent launch of this Zuni rocket either hit this tank, caused the fuel to leak out, and I guess from the heat of the missile or whatever, ignited it. So that started that fire. And the repair part was attempting to put that out, apparently, when this bomb, one of these 1,000-pound bombs I'd mentioned to you, sustained enough heat to detonate it. And that started the sympathetic detonation of the rest of the munitions on the airplanes. Well, when we first got out of the airplane, we could see the whole back of the flight deck exploding and blowing up and so forth. And I had a camera with me, which we always took on missions so we could do a little bomb damage assessment, little recce type thing. So I took a number of pictures with this thing. But we didn't want to spend too much time in flight deck because it looked like the whole thing was going to blow up. And it was a great big tanker airplane sitting up there, which would have really been a spectacular thing as well. So I took the pictures and we jumped down below decks because it was one of those situations where it was like time was of the essence. It would look like, you know, we could be engulfed in this thing at the time. And as I mentioned earlier, when we started to feel the ship turn, I took a peek outside, and it looked like, as I mentioned, the explosions and fires were confined to all the airplanes that were just back in the fantail area, port and starboard side along in that behind the island. So that's when we emerged from. We were only in there for, I guess, a couple of minutes at most. But when we went in there at the time, it looked like the whole thing was going to go up. You know, the whole flight deck. And so we ducked below real quick, and then we came back in after a couple of minutes, and the fires and explosions were contained to the after portion of the flight deck where all the airplanes had been spotted that were going to go on this mission. You could hear them, and there was like a little shudder and so forth, but it wasn't like an earth-shattering type thing, because we were basically probably 750, 800 feet away. We were right up underneath the bow, right underneath the flight deck, and it's pretty hot up there, obviously, not just from the fire, but from the weather out there. We were up there for a couple of hours, I guess, so they were rotating through, and there were other things we had to do internally to the ship, too, cleaning up various compartments with an awful lot of water damage. And so it was one of those things where everybody sort of chipped in, helping clean up, and managing different crews to do different things and so forth, and so we did a lot of that. But as far as it took several days to get everything under control. But all the initial stuff was probably done within hours of the first explosions, because once the bombs went off, and the fuel was what was causing the fires, right, from the airplanes. So that once that either in a combination of being extinguished or burning itself out, the major portions of the fire, as I recall, were pretty much under control within several hours on the flight deck. But there was internal damage that had started other fires that were being fought and so forth. One of the destroyers right alongside of us, here it is right here, pumping water in. Let's see, that was the Rupertus was alongside, and she was fighting. She was using her own hoses to fight fires that were below the port side flight deck, where some of those big bombs I mentioned had dropped through. So she was doing a heroic job, just flying really tight wing on the ship, pumping water into where the fires were. Well, I think everyone was pretty much in shock. There were a lot of portions of the ship that were, the berthing areas and so forth, and some of the workshops were basically uninhabitable at first. But so that was all part of the. Once all the fires and so forth were extinguished, and then it got to be a cleanup mission to do that, and then we were in port for I think the better part of 10 days. They put some steel plates over the bomb penetrations on the flight deck, and tested the catapults and the resting system. And essentially, one of the things that wanted to be proved was that the ship was still serviceable, even though it had sustained a fair amount of damage. And that was demonstrated. And then we weren't going to be staying out there any longer, so that was the end of the deployment for us. So the ship steamed on home, and then went in the shipyard for lots of internal repairs and so